The second Sunday in June is always slated for the traditional National Puerto Rican Day Parade. This year, the parade turned into a march for racial and socioeconomic justice when thousands of people from all walks of life gathered at Mitchell Square Park in Washington Heights to join the Latinx community march in solidarity with and in defense of Black lives. The event opened with a Dominican folkloric percussion presentation that led into calling out the names of those who have been lost due to police brutality.
We are here today in response to a legacy of police violence that most recently took the lives of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Alan Ruiz, Rayshard Brooks. Say the names.
Protesters lined up on Broadway between 167th and 166th Street before making their first stop in front of the Audubon Ballroom to invoke the fighting spirits of freedom fighters who have spoken there in the past. Freedom fighters such as Don Pedro Avisu Campos, lead figure of the Puerto Rican independence movement, and Brother Malcolm X, who was assassinated there with police collusion.
Avisu vive! Avisu vive!
As protesters made their way down Broadway, we crossed down 162nd Street towards St. Nicholas to honor the spirit of Jose Kiko Garcia, who was murdered on that block by NYPD back in 1992.
And they're saying justicia for Kiko, justice for Kiko, who was killed here by the NYPD.
The march route was deliberately created to highlight powerful links between Latinos and Black Americans. One of the march's coordinators, Baruch College historian Professor Johanna Fernandez, schooled us on the fight for free education back in the 70s.
And now we're at City College, where there's a huge movement in the 1970s to make it free, because as soon as people of color became the students of the university, you had to pay for it. Prior to the 1970s, it was free education for the working class of New York. I'm a professor at Baruch, and so I understand that we educate the working class, the immigrants of the city, and increasingly education is not affordable. So there's a struggle ongoing to keep education free and available to the heart and soul of the city.
The protest continued making its way south on Amsterdam Avenue with no permits. Protesters took over the streets carrying signs of loved ones they've lost to police violence, chanting "La vidas negra importa," translated to English means Black Lives Matter, keeping in mind that many in the Latino community consider themselves Black and part of the African diaspora. Remembering this march is taking place during a pandemic crisis, on the front line carrying the sign, "Racism is a health crisis," were members from the New York State Nurses Association. We spoke with president of the association and Montefiore ER nurse, Judy Sheridan Gonzalez, who addressed the impact COVID-19 has had within the people of color communities.
The highest rates of infection in the Bronx, where most of the communities are people of color. The social inequities that exist have harmed the health of our communities, including the murder of young Black men and women, people in immigration, the incarceration of people. It all contributes to poor health, and we are committed to the health of our population. We took an oath to protect everybody, regardless of what they look like and where they come from. And that is not happening in healthcare today. So that woke us up, especially during the COVID crisis, where the frontline workers, the caregivers, and the other frontline workers who died were mostly people of color, in the communities of people of color, and this has to stop. We want to stop it. We're excited about this movement for Black lives. All lives will matter when Black lives matter.
We walked with march organizer and former Young Lord member Minerva, who spearheaded a committee to coordinate the protest in a week's time.
I mean, you guys mobilized this in like a week's time, this protest.
We did, in a week. Johanna Fernandez and Mickey Melendez, co-founder of the Young Lords, got everybody together, and you will see when we get to 125th Street, we should have at least 5,000 by the time we get to El Barrio.
As we made our way towards 125th Street, we were greeted by hundreds standing in the plaza of the Adam Clayton Powell Jr. State Office building. The music, the chants, and energy of our people are so infectious when it comes to making a point, even when fighting systemic racism.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter!
Speakers were introduced by Justice Committee Representative David Galarza, which consisted of families who wore signs and images of their lost ones due to police violence.
People that have had family members murdered by the NYPD. So without much further ado, I introduce you to Constance Malcolm, and then she'll introduce the rest of the families.
Hip-hop artist Immortal technique, whose origins are from Peru, galvanized the crowd, identifying our relations.
We know who we are! We are indigenous and African people, and we stand in solidarity with the lives of black people that have been stolen in this country, and we will not go to sleep!
Being a community advocate myself, I was even shouted out for reporting.
So give it up. She's the only person, the only reporter who covered us before the march. Thank you, Rhina Valentin. Gracias.
New York City legendary poet NGoma read from a treasured book of poetry, educating culturally.
Go and tell the children, tell them we're real heroes that lived and died for freedom. Call them by their name: Fred Hampton, Little Bobby Hutton, Safia Bukhari, Herman Ferguson, Bashir Hamid, Zayd Malik Shakur, Geronimo, as in Jijaga Pret. Just to name a few who died too soon, like Kouassi Balagoon.
And as we began to make our way to march through East Harlem, we ran into world-renowned musician Bobby Sanabria, who shared this about Fred Hampton, former Black Panther murdered by the police, who founded the Rainbow Coalition.
The only thing I can say about this is that it reminds me when I was a young child protesting against the Vietnam War. Everybody was together in solidarity during the Civil Rights Movement, obviously. And this is the vision that Fred Hampton thought of many, many, many years ago, everyone together as one. So it's a beautiful day for New York City.
After marching east on 125th Street and south on Lexington Avenue towards the final destination, 111th Street, where the United Methodist Church resides, also known as the famous People's Church, that was occupied by the Young Lords Party during the Civil Rights era back in the late 60s, early 70s. We were greeted by the sounds of Bomba Yo, playing traditional Afro-Puerto Rican folkloric music known as Bomba y Plena. Speeches were made from the roof of the People's Church, where we caught up with legendary poet and revolutionary Mariposa, who served on the Cultural Committee of today's march. She shared her reasons for pushing the message.
We don't want police reforms. We want an end to this systemic violence that really comes from systemic racism. And we have to address the what people like to call the climate of this country. No, it's not the climate of this country. It's actually how this country was founded.
Right.
And we need to overturn that. We need a new beginning. And for me, that's what this represents.
Closing speeches by Pastor Lebron of the First United Methodist Church included invoking spirit.
There is a power in the people that walk and live and fight together, because the reality is that none of us are free until we are all free.
And the man whose idea it was for us to march today in solidarity with our brothers and sisters is no stranger to this movement. Young Lords Party co-founder Mickey Melendez left everyone with words of hope to build on, based on Black Panther leader Fred Hampton's vision.
And we together will change the institutions that deny us our dignity and humanity. Let us be the modern Rainbow Coalition. Let's become human and fight side by side for each other.
In unity, there is power. And while we marched with a fighting spirit against the inequities people of color continue to endure, the message today was clear in saying, here's to leaving things better than we found them. For BronxNet, I'm Rhina Valentin.